Hey guys, welcome to Kachi Bachi. Today we are joining you to talk about how to thread a sewing machine. So this is a pretty basic video. However, I can tell you in the hundreds and hundreds of people that I have taught how to use their sewing machine, even ladies who have been sewing for 40 years, they almost always tell me, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. We are going to be threading multiple machines. So if it doesn't look exactly like yours, then skip to the next chapter or stay tuned because we will probably cover something that looks pretty darn similar to what you may be sewing on. It's absolutely nap time here today. So we have our 2-year-old sleeping and we're taking advantage of that. So you get to meet Enoch. He is our 2-month-old and he's going to be joining us today for this video. So please pardon any sleeping breathing sounds that you may enjoy. So the very first thing that you are going to need is a spool of thread and a bobbin. You will also need a spool cap. First off, I want to say spool caps and bobbins are not universal. It seems like they ought to be and should be, but they are very much machine and brand specific. So if you need extra bobbins, make sure you bring one with you to, if you're going like Hobby Lobby or something like that, to get it. They're not going to be able to tell you what bobbin for your machine. They are not universal. There's 3 main types. They're not interchangeable. And they will absolutely ruin your day if you go to sew with the wrong bobbin in. So make sure you have the right bobbin for your machine. Next is make sure you have the right spool cap for your machine. Once again, these are not universal. This spool cap only fits on this machine. It will not fit on any of my other 3 sewing machines or sewing machines here. So make sure that you have a spool cap that is larger than the spool of thread that you're going to be sewing with. So that's a big deal. Especially if you have a horizontal spool pin, you want that spool cap to pull the thread away from any notch that may be in the spool or any rough edges. That if it's old spool or spool that's been dropped and there's a rough edge, that can cause it to snag and that'll break your thread while you're sewing, which kind of sucks. So make sure your spool cap is larger than the end of your spool of thread, and that will pull that away from your thread while you're sewing, and you should have a more smooth sewing experience. The exception to the rule is if you have what's called a mini cone as your thread, you're going to have it where the wall is going to the base of your spool holder, even if the thread tail comes off from over top. And with these, you actually want a spool holder that fits into the end. We'll show a picture of that here, and that's going to allow this thread to come off smoothly. So that is the exception to your spool cap rule. To me, if you understand the reasons behind doing something, you understand the why of doing it this way, then it makes it much easier to turn that into a habit of doing it the correct way from the onset. This first sewing machine is the Baby Lock Joy. We have another video if you're interested about why this is hands down my favorite beginner sewing machine. It's one of the best budget sewing machines that you can get. So if you're interested, check that out in the link below. That being said, we still absolutely plan to do a giveaway with this sewing machine, so subscribe if you would like to be a part of that and enter to win it. We still have a few more videos that we are planning to make with it, like how to do a buttonhole, how to finish your edges, how to do some basic zippers and such like that. So if you have anything that you would like to see us do, please let us know in the comments. Steer us along the way so that we can put out the content that you are most interested in viewing. If you have anybody who's interested in sewing machines or who just got a sewing machine for Christmas or anything like that, please absolutely share this video with them. We would love to do what we can to help them along their sewing process. I'm going to put my spool of thread on with the tail of my thread coming out from the underneath side. So for threading, I'm going to take my thread, come behind this thread guide, come around, and the most important step of threading your machine and threading your bobbin is to get it in the tension disc. So I want my thread to come all the way underneath this disc before it goes to my bobbin. I just want to show you what it looks like when you don't catch this tension disc. If your thread is not all the way underneath that tension disc, you get a very, very loosely wound bobbin. I should not be able to squeeze my thread together or pull this thread down into the thread on the bobbin. This is never going to make a pretty stitch. I'm going to pull this off to get my thread through this little hole in the bobbin. I'm going to take my bobbin and put it onto my bobbin winder, and I will rotate until the notch on my bobbin lines up with the little bar on my bobbin winder. Your machine may or may not have this. This is not a vital step. However, technically that is the proper way to wind your bobbin. I'm going to hold my thread tail up while I push my bobbin over to the right, and then we will step on the foot control, and that's going to begin winding our bobbin. Once it takes a few seconds and winds a little bit, you can come in and cut that thread tail off. It will automatically slow down to an almost stop whenever the bobbin is full, and you can just release the foot control at that point. From here, I would push it to the right to disengage the bobbin winder. I can't tell you how many people have come in saying, my machine, I step on the foot control and it doesn't sew. And it makes a motor noise, but it doesn't sew. And it's because their bobbin winder is still engaged with no bobbin on it. It's a simple little thing, happens all the time. So don't feel ignorant if you do that. Just always check your bobbin winder and make sure it's disengaged before you begin sewing. Side note, if you want to save these, my mom always saved these little threads and put them in a cup near her sewing machine, and then she would drape them in the trees and birds will use them in their nests, and it's a super fun thing to go and check the bird's nests in your yard and see little fun colorful threads. At least I enjoyed it. And the next thing, now that we have our bobbin wound, we can put it into the machine. So I'm going to start by removing my bobbin cover. So this is a top loading bobbin. It is called a horizontal bobbin because it is going horizontally, whereas bobbins that you put in from the front of the machine are known as an oscillating hook. And so this is a horizontal rotary hook. You're going to drop your bobbin into the machine, and I usually hold a finger onto the bobbin while I am pulling the thread around. It's going to go into this groove at the front. That is putting tension on your bobbin. If you miss that groove, you absolutely will not get a nice stitch, if it makes a stitch at all. So you want to hold your bobbin still, and that allows you to put some tension on the thread to really get it into that tension disc or that groove, whatever you may identify it as. We're going to pull it around and just hold it to the back while we put our bobbin cover on. Once I have my bobbin in, I'm going to move on to threading the actual machine. So again, I want to double check that my presser foot is up. That means my tension discs are open. If you thread the machine with the presser foot down, your tension discs are closed, which may or may not result in your thread getting in the tension discs when you go to sew. So when your presser foot is up, your tension discs are open, your thread's going to fall in between them, and you will get nice, good tension on your thread. I'm going to raise my take-up lever until it is at the highest position. You're going to rotate your hand wheel until your take-up lever is at the highest position. So I will start again with my thread coming off from the underneath side of my spool, and a spool cap that's larger than the end of my spool of thread. And then we're going to come under this thread guide at the back. So I'm just going to catch this here. This is a pre-tensioner. It just makes sure that everything is in the right place before it goes to the threading. I'm going to come down this groove, make a U-turn at the bottom, come back up to the top, and I want to watch this thread fall into the hole of my take-up lever. There's a little rounded edge at the end. I'm calling that the hole, and you want your thread all the way there. If your thread doesn't make it to that point in the take-up lever, just run it through that path again until you see it fall there, because it will not pull up a stitch without being in that position. I'm going to come down this channel. Most machines are going to have a thread guide somewhere along the front. You'll put that thread in the thread guide, and I will lower my presser foot at this point. Prior to lowering my presser foot, I had the ability to just pull thread freely. Now that my presser foot is down, it puts tension against that thread. That makes it easier when I go to use a needle threader or to thread the machine. It also lets me know that my machine is threaded properly because it actually caught the tension disc. So now that I have it behind the thread guide, I will either thread my needle manually, depending on your machine, or you may have a needle threader such as one of these, and you can use it to thread the needle. Needle threaders vary slightly depending from machine to machine and company brand to company brand, or brand to brand. So yours may look just like this, or it may be slightly different. They all function relatively similarly. So I'm going to catch my thread on this little protrusion or nose on the left-hand side, and then I'm going to bring it across to the right, very gently holding it so that it's not preventing it from pulling the thread through, but it does still keep it in place while I am still waiting to pull my thread through. Once I have it in position, I will raise the needle threader, and that should pull a loop of thread through the eye of the needle. You're just going to pull that loop the rest of the way through, and that completes the threading process. Before I begin sewing, I'm going to pull my bobbin thread to the top of my machine. So while I have my presser foot down, and while I'm holding on to the end of my needle thread, I'm going to rotate my hand wheel towards myself a full 360 degrees. And then if you tug on your needle thread, you should see a loop of thread pull up from the underneath side. That is your bobbin thread, and you are pulling it to the top of the sewing machine, and that's going to allow you to begin your process of sewing. So once I have my bobbin thread up at the top, I can raise my presser foot, slide my needle thread into the groove. There should be some sort of opening on your presser foot to allow that thread to fit underneath the foot. So I'm going to slide my needle thread under my presser foot, and then I'm just going to do a test sew, and I'm going to start my material wherever my feed dogs begin. You want that material touching at least the first tooth or two of your feed dogs to allow it to actually feed underneath your machine. And that's that. And following all of those steps, we have a lovely, beautiful stitch here. Side note, this can go in at the end. You never want to unthread your machine by pulling it out from the back. I will always break my thread and then unthread by pulling it through my needle, and that keeps you from pulling lint into your machine.
A wild husband appearance. Hey you! We know that you're not subscribed. Look, most of you aren't subscribed. Why not? We're awesome. You should subscribe. They cost you nothing, and it helps us with the algorithm and whatnot. The algorithm helps other people like you find us, who hopefully find this helpful. If you don't find this helpful, then don't subscribe. But if you like us, like this video and subscribe and stuff. Otherwise, we can't do this anymore. Jordan gets embarrassed and doesn't want to ask you to subscribe, so I have to do this. So,
Alrighty, so now we're going to move on to the next model of sewing machine. This one runs into like the $1,000 to $5,000 range. They're all going to thread pretty similarly to this guy here. Actually, these thread almost identical to like the $20,000 machines, aside from pressing a button that actually threads the needle. Everything else functions really, really similarly. This is the Baby Lock Melody. They no longer make this machine. It's been replaced with the Lyric, and this is probably about a 10-year-old machine. I guess 7 to 10-year-old. I bought it used. This is a computerized machine, so it's going to show you what some of those slightly more advanced sewing machines threading processes would look like. So this has a dust cover over the top to keep any lint out. I'm going to raise that, obviously, to begin the threading process. And once more, the very first thing we have to do is wind a bobbin. I'm going to start by making sure my presser foot is in the upright position. So I want my presser foot up, and I want to rotate my hand wheel until my needle is in the highest position. This machine actually has a groove on the hand wheel that lines up with the seam of the case, and that lets you know when that's in the highest position. This also has a needle up-down button. If you have that feature, I absolutely would recommend using it because it's going to seamlessly put your needle in the exact perfect position for threading. Can you hit that, Jared? And even giant man hands can do this. So once more, the very first thing we're going to do is put our spool of thread onto the machine with the thread tail coming off from the underneath side and a spool cap that is larger than the end of my spool of thread. I'm going to start by coming off to the left here and making a U-turn. Again, I'm going to hold my thread to give myself some tension throughout this process, and that makes it easier to get it underneath this tension disc. So now that I have my bobbin thread under the bobbin tensioner, I'm going to put my bobbin onto the bobbin winder and rotate it until I hear that snap into place. Again, it's not entirely vital, but it is a good idea. Another thing with these machines that are computerized, they have a speed control. Oftentimes, that speed control is also going to be the speed control for your bobbin winder. So if you are impatient like most, you can speed that up by pushing it all the way to the right, and that's going to wind your bobbin the fastest. Technically, supposedly, you are supposed to wind your bobbin at whatever speed you are going to be sewing at. So if you sew with your speed all the way up, you want to wind the bobbin with the speed all the way up. If you sew super slow, technically they suggest that you wind your bobbin more slowly. I can't say so. I found a massive difference. The biggest place that it's supposedly going to interfere with things is in free motion quilting. I'm going to start at the back of my bobbin and wrap around, wrapping towards myself clockwise, and I'll give it a good 5 to 10 wraps. And then this machine has a groove underneath the bobbin, and that's going to act as a thread cutter. So once I've wrapped it around 5 to 10 times, you can take that thread tail and just slide it into the groove and pull until it cuts it off. From here, I will push my bobbin over to the right. That's going to engage the bobbin winder motor. And if you have your foot control plugged in, then you would just step on your foot control, and that's going to engage that. Or if you don't have your foot control plugged in, you would hit your start button. It will turn yellow at that point, and that will let you know that it is ready to wind the bobbin. And that's that. Now we have the bobbin wound. We're going to put this bobbin in. Once more, it is a horizontal bobbin, so I'm going to release the bobbin cover and pull that off. And this has what's called an easy set bobbin. You're going to drop the bobbin in. Again, I like to hold on to it to give myself something to pull against with this thread. So I'm going to just hold my finger on it as I pull the thread tail around into this groove. This, you make a U-turn at the top, and then it's got a thread cutter here at the end. That's going to trim that tail off. And the nice thing about these is you do not have to pull your bobbin tail up to the top when you begin sewing. You just put your fabric underneath the presser foot and hit start. But before we do that, we have to thread the machine. So let's move back up here to the top and go through the threading process for this machine. I'm just going to pull it out of my bobbin tension disc, and then we will keep going from here. So I'm going to follow this channel along at the back, going to the left, and then we're going to go down, make a U-turn, come back up to the top, and again, I want to make sure that my thread goes into the take-up lever. This machine, you can't see if it does that, but you can kind of feel it pop into place. It'll become second nature, and you won't think twice about it as time moves on. You just kind of go to the top, make a U-turn, and head your way back down. From here, I can pull my thread freely. Now I'm going to lower my presser foot, and it puts tension on my thread. That lets me know that I have it threaded properly, and it also makes it much easier to get behind this thread guide. So I'm going to slide it behind this thread guide right in front of the needle. That's just going to hold it in place for our needle threader. And now that I have that done, we're going to follow it across this groove over the top of this number 7 guide here, and then around on the left hand side. This machine has a thread cutter. That thread cutter is typically going to put your thread tail at the perfect length to be pulled all the way through when you use your needle threader. Once you've used your thread cutter, you're going to hit this plunger and push it all the way down to the very bottom, and that's going to swoop around and thread your needle. You hit some resistance here. You want to keep pushing all the way down though. That's the big kicker. And once you have that done, then you have your needle threaded. From here with this machine, I'm just going to put that needle thread through the presser foot so that it's underneath there, and then we would begin sewing. You don't have to pull that bobbin thread up to the top. This machine also has a thread cutter, so that when I'm finished with my seam, I can just press that scissor trim or thread cutting button. That's going to trim my thread and pull it to the back of my project for me, so I can just raise my presser foot and pull my fabric out. I don't have anything else to do. And then when I go to sew again, once more, I'll just put my fabric underneath. You don't have to pull that bobbin thread up to the top. Caveat, some quilters don't like the loop that is left when you first start sewing with that again. So if you are quilting and you're not chain piecing, oftentimes quilters will pull that bobbin thread up to the top so that you get a very nice fresh start on the end of your fabric for every single block piece. In sewing, it's not quite as vital with that because you're not starting new seams every 2 inches. I'll always do a test sew on the material that I'm going to be stitching on to make sure that my tensions are right and that my stitch looks pretty. This one, we did our little test sew and it came out lovely. Alrighty guys, now we're going to move on to this Bernina. So this threads probably a little more similarly to some of the older machines as well, because they still have a front loading bobbin. It's just the way that they do things. So if you have a slightly older machine or if you have a front loading bobbin, this is going to be the way that you go about threading it. So the first thing I want to mention is this has an option for a vertical spool holder. Personally, I default to that, partly because you can go without a spool cap 9 times out of 10. If it has a thread guide that comes up above it, you would still want a spool cap to help keep that from falling into any notch for storing the thread. Nowadays, spools of thread have a little ridge that opens up to allow you to spool it, so not as many have that notch that can be problematic when you're sewing. Either way, it's a good rule of thumb to have a spool cap that is larger than the spool of thread that you are sewing with when you begin your project. So I use the vertical spool pin, partly because I use both of them. I'll put a spool of thread on my vertical spool pin and a spool of thread on my horizontal. One I can leave for threading the machine, the other I can leave to wind bobbins, so I don't have to unthread my machine to wind bobbins. It's a very nice little thing, absolutely not vital, it's just a convenience. So I tend to default to the vertical spool pin for my bobbin winding, and I begin by coming and wrapping from front to back. So I'm going to catch this tension disc and go from the front of my machine to the back, again holding tension to make sure that that thread has gotten all the way into the tension disc. Once it does that, I'm going to take the end of my thread, put it through one of the holes on my bobbin, and then pop that onto the bobbin winder. These machines don't have the little notch to line up, so you don't have to worry about that. Once I have the thread through the little hole on my bobbin, I'm going to push this tab over to the right, and that's going to engage my bobbin winder. Swinging over to this machine here, this was actually my very first sewing machine from when I was like 5 years old. I would put my thread here, again start from the front to the back of the machine to go in that tension disc, and then put your bobbin onto the bobbin winder. You do still push it over to the left, but you have to disengage this flywheel. So I do that by holding on to the flywheel or hand wheel, and then this machine I would rotate towards me in order to find slack in this handle. So this has a secondary handle. There are tons and tons and tons of machines that have that. It is a slightly older mechanism, so you don't see that so much on newer machines, but you want to make sure that this is released, and that's going to allow the bobbin winder to engage. Once you've wound your bobbin, you would just tighten that back up and push that over, and that's going to re-engage it to the motor of the machine. If you don't have either of these, you may have a hand wheel that actually pops out. So instead of having this release like with a smaller handle, you're going to have a machine and you literally would just pull the whole hand wheel out, and that would engage the bobbin winder motor. I'm going to head back to this guy here because everything is the same. So once I have that pushed over, then I'm going to just step on the foot control and it will stop whenever it is finished winding the bobbin. Now that we have our bobbin wound, we can put it into the machine. So I'm just going to open it up, and I'm actually going to take out my bobbin case. So this is the bobbin case on an upright. So this is called an oscillating hook. And with that, in order to pull it out, you simply grab this little door and then use that to pull the whole bobbin case out. Once it's out, I can drop my bobbin free from the machine and put in whatever color bobbin thread I would want, or replace it if it's empty. If your machine comes with metal bobbins, you are absolutely welcome to use metal bobbins on the machine. If it doesn't come with metal bobbins, if it comes with plastic bobbins, I would 100% stick with plastic bobbins. You can use plastic if it came with metal, but not vice versa. So with an oscillating rotary hook, I want my thread tail to come off the right hand side. I'm going to put that into my bobbin case. And again, I just hold it to keep it from spinning as I have it follow around, and it's going to go into this groove and then underneath the tension disc. From there, you can put it through a hole, this little pigtail, if you would like. I never ever do that, but technically you can put your tail through from back to front, that pigtail, and then put it into the machine. When I go to put it in, I'm going to have this little tail coming off the top. And again, if you have your flywheel in the correct position, that's going to be at the top of the machine. And I'm going to slide it in and then push, and you should hear a snap when it engages in place. Alternately, you can use this little door to pull it out, and then you can also use that little door to put it in. There's a groove in this post that comes in the center of the bobbin assembly, and when you hold this door open, then it allows you to slide it in past that post or past that groove on it, and then the door closing locks that door onto the groove in the post. If you just hold it and push it in, the snapping sound that you hear is that little door sliding into the groove on that bobbin post. Over time, doing it that way, it technically can wear that groove down, and then your bobbin case is going to want to slide out. I can't tell you how many times I've done it, and I've never had that post wear out, even on this 50-year-old sewing machine. It absolutely is worth it to make sure that your bobbin is all the way in, to me, to hear that snap. If you don't want to do that, you can hold that little door open and slide it in that way. For some people, that's easier and it gives you a handle. It's personal preference to me. Technically, they would say that you want to hold the door and push it in. Now that we have our bobbin in place, we're going to thread the machine. So just unthread it from my bobbin tension. I'm going to hold my thread to give myself something to pull against. Slide it into this thread guide pre-tension at the back. Come down this right channel, make a U-turn, come back up, and make a U-turn at the top. Again, I want to make sure that my thread goes into this take-up lever. From here, I can pull freely on my thread. I'm going to lower my presser foot. That gives me some tension to put it behind this thread guide. Once behind the thread guide with this machine, now I can engage my needle threader. So I'm just going to pull my needle threader down on the left. I catch this little protrusion and swing my thread all the way across to the right, very gently holding it and then releasing the needle threader. That allows a loop to be pulled through, and I'm just going to continue pulling that loop the rest of the way through. Now I'm going to rotate my hand wheel towards myself a full 360 degrees and then pull up on that bobbin thread. Once I pull my bobbin thread up to the top, I will raise my presser foot and slide both of those threads underneath the presser foot to the back and do my test sew. Lower my presser foot, taking these stitches, and there we have it, a beautiful seam with a properly threaded sewing machine. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you found something somewhere in this to be useful. If you have any questions, please just drop us a line in the comments. I will absolutely try my darndest to help you out. Subscribe, like, okay, bye.